Today we'll be covering chapter 20, the last chapter. This will cover human development. Now, growth and development occurs throughout our lifetimes, right? As until we die. And in this chapter, I'm just going to cover a small part of that process, which really is before we're born. So we're going to start with this question. What does the term prenatal mean? Natal refers to birth, and so pre is before birth, right? And I won't be talking about postnatal development. All right, so let's begin talking about this prenatal period and kind of like when does each occur, and then what a little bit about what's happening in each of those periods. So we divide the prenatal period into three, what we call trimesters. The first trimester is actually the most critical time in development. This is where a lot of the tissues are forming, okay, organs are forming, and it's very, very critical or very vulnerable to drugs and other conditions, microbes, infections, radiation, things like that. So it's this time, and sometimes in this first trimester, um, there's a period where you don't even know you're pregnant, right? At the very beginning. But there are a lot of things that are happening at that time. And we'll really talk about that time within this first trimester. Because if we look at the second and third trimesters, uh, a lot of the organs are almost complete, right? So it's this first trimester, the first, 3 months. And if we were to divide the prenatal period up, it would be, three-month periods approximately. Um, and by the first 3 months, most of the organ systems are developing and almost nearly complete, definitely by the second trimester. And the third trimester, there's just a lot of growth. But most organ systems would be almost fully functional, right? So we're going to talk about a little bit of this first trimester, and that's about it. Okay. So let's start here with fertilization. And we kind of covered that in the last chapter, all right, where we talked about reproduction. And we know that fertilization includes that union between the sperm and the egg. And it forms a fertilized egg called a zygote. Okay. And egg being the oocyte, forming a new individual. And more specifically, it's called a secondary oocyte. This occurs, remember, in the uterine tube, and it's called a zygote. And so let's look at twins. Okay, how do we form twins? So, well, there's different types of twins. Um, some we call, one type of twin is identical twins, and the other type of twin is called a fraternal twin, right? So which is which? The first type of twin is called a monozygotic twin. So we know a zygote is a fertilized egg, right? So if you have a fertilized egg, mono means one. One fertilized egg, one sperm. Now, in the next question, we'll talk about, how do we get from a zygote to, different stages of development. But what happens is that zygote begins to divide. And so what was once one fertilized egg, a single cell, it will divide to form two cells. All right. And then those cells continue to divide by the process of mitosis. What happens if after that first cell division, those two cells separate and each now becomes a complete individual. That is what we call a monozygotic twin, right? So one fertilized egg, one zygote, and you get two individuals. But what do we know about that? That each one of those cells are identical as far as their DNA goes, right? Because each division in mitosis results in two cells that are identical to the original. So if done correctly, right, if there aren't any problems in that mitosis um, mitosis division, right, then it should be identical. So what would be a dizygotic twin? Again, a zygote, one fertilized egg, but now it's dizygotic. It's two zygotes, right? Which means two oocytes, two eggs released at the same time. That can happen, and two separate sperm. And so we get two individuals that happen to be, conceived at the same time, but they are actually um, different in terms of their genetic makeup. All right. So a monozygotic, all right, would be one zygote. So we get a egg, and then we get a sperm, right? And we get a single fertilized egg, a zygote. Okay. Now we could talk about chromosomes and things like that. I don't want to get too much into it, but each sex cell, okay, the sperm will have 23 chromosomes donated by the father, and the egg will have 23 chromosomes donated by the mother. Okay, so the zygote then will have 46 chromosomes in that individual. Now, the process of mitosis is to divide the cells, specifically the nucleus. So each nucleus will have 46 chromosomes. That's through the process of mitosis. You make an extra copy of each chromosome, and then you separate those chromosomes so each one gets a full set. All right, but remember, half of these are donated from mom and half of them from dad. And then those 46, we make copies of those and we distribute it equally there. Now, in this case, each one of these will become a separate individual. But all their cells are identical, right? So all the cells are identical, and as far as genetically identical. Now, in a dizygotic individuals, there are two eggs and two separate sperm. And what we get are two zygotes. Zygotes, right? But genetically, they're different, right? Because this is a different sperm than that, and these are different eggs. So, um, they're not the same here. And then each one will become a separate person, except, right? Except they happen to be born at the same time. So they're like siblings. They have the genetic, difference of siblings. Okay, hope that makes sense. So let's look at some of these next stages. The question is, what is a morula? What is a blastocyst? So after, okay, after the zygote is formed, go back to, here we have our fertilized egg. our zygote, this cell will begin dividing. It will divide. It will divide. It doesn't really get bigger. Okay, but now, and it forms a ball of cells. 4, 8, and 16. So when we get to the level of about 16 cells, then it is called a morula. So morula is a ball of cells. It comes from the word that I think it means like a berry or a mulberry. A mulberry has like lots of little components to it in that berry, so it looked like that. So someone called it a morula. Now, this morula will continue to divide, and this occurs as it's moving down the uterine tube, right? So we have fertilization that occurs in the uterine tube up here. That's why fertilization has to occur here, because we need it to have time to form that morula. And then that morula will continue to divide. And what was once like a solid ball of cells, now there's a little opening that occurs in it, and it gets filled with fluid. And so the morula so these are all cells here, lots more cells, right? Because it continues to divide. And each one of these is like a cell. And then there's a space inside. Then it becomes, this is called a blastocyst. All right, and which is a hollow ball, a hollow ball of cells. Okay, but there's some certain areas. This is called the blastocyst cavity. This area here is called the trophoblast. And this is called the inner cell mass. Okay, now this inner cell mass is the part that's going to become the developing embryo. And the trophoblast here is just going to kind of nourish in this area. This inner cell mass then will undergo changes. It will organize, it will form 2 layers of cells, and then it will form 3 layers of cells and begin organizing. All right, so this is the morula, this is the blastocyst. Back. And put in those answers here. All right, so ball of cells, blastocyst, hollow ball cells with a fluid-filled cavity. Oh, the blastocele is another name for the blastocyst cavity. I'm going to put that here. Same thing. Okay, and let's look at this picture. And this shows you what's happening here. 2 cells, 4 cells. We get a little morula here, and then we get the blastocyst. Okay. Now, this inner cell mass here is going to begin changing and form 3 layers, which will be known as the 3 germ layers. Look what that's called. And let me show you a picture too about the movement of those cells to form the 3 layers. So about 14 days after fertilization, we get a process called gastrulation, which is then forming these 3 layers. There's the ectoderm, and these layers then become different parts of the embryo and then the fetus and then the adult, right? And so when these cells, and we're talking just a couple of weeks, right? 14 days, a couple weeks of development. And like I said, sometimes you might not even know you're pregnant, but these layers are being formed that are going to become specific tissues in the body. And so it's really important to take care of yourself, all right? Especially if you're planning pregnancy or you might be pregnant. You really want to be careful in these critical phases. Ectoderm becomes the epidermis, the outer layer of the skin, brain, spinal cord, facial bones. Mesoderm becomes muscle and most of the bones. Dermis of the skin, lower part, heart. Endoderm becomes a lining of digestive tract, lungs, urinary bladder. So, each one of these layers is going to become something specific in the body. And like I said, this happens very early in development. And and then, by the second trimester, a lot of these organs are, forming, and then at the end being almost fully formed. And so that last trimester is really just growth and preparing for the postnatal period after birth, right? So this is just kind of showing you the migration of cells to form three layers instead of four, what we call those germ layers. Okay, and that's about all I'm going to discuss. Um, you can go in and look further to see, what happens in development, but I just did want to emphasize the how critical it is in those early phases of development. All right, that's it. That was a short lecture, and thanks for watching. Thanks for making it to the end of this class and finish strong, right?